Welcome to Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. We're in Chapter 13, Kuhn's Critical Thinking. This is session number 11. Session 11 represents Chapter 11 in the essay written by Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He calls this chapter is The Invisibility of Revolutions. Now, why does he call them invisible? Or what makes them invisible? Both scientists and laymen take much of their image of creative science activity from an authoritative source that systematically disguises, partly for important functional reason, the existence and significance of scientific revolutions. Names the chapter The Invisibility of Revolutions, Scientific Revolutions. Now, why are they invisible? Well, then he goes right at it. And in his criteria, he says both scientists and laymen take much of their image of creative scientific activity from an authoritative source that systematically disguises, partly for functional reasons, and the existence and significance of scientific revolutions. As we've seen before, Thomas Kuhn does not have a great view of the textbook industry and feels that they have their agenda, and their agenda is to reinforce the idea of a linear, systematic, and if it's linear and systematic, then there's an end goal. And I think that is one of the main things that Thomas Kuhn is aiming at, is that science does not have an end goal. To have an end goal is to be like teleological in that there's a purpose. And Thomas Kuhn is saying this science does not support a goal nor purpose. As the source of authority, I have in mind principally textbooks of science, together with both the popularizations and the philosophical works modeled on them. So what was Thomas Kuhn referring to? He was referring to, in the previous quote, as the source of authority, and that the authority is teaching, and that authority is teaching a type of science that is linear, that is successive, that does not have these revolutions. And that's why revolutions are invisible, is because the source of authority. And I have in mind principally textbooks of science, together with the popularizations and the philosophical works modeled on them. In short, they have to be rewritten. We're talking about textbooks. They have to be rewritten in the aftermath of each scientific revolution. And once rewritten, they inevitably disguise not only the role, but the very existence of the revolutions that produced them. In his view, science textbooks are rewritten in the evolution, or in the paradigm change, to erase the fact that there was a paradigm change, and to make it more continuous, to make it more linear. Textbooks thus begin by truncating the scientist's sense of his discipline's history, and then proceed to supply a substitute for what they have eliminated. I can say close to the same thing. I believe I have a different theory, habit, prejudice, and culture, and I believe in a different paradigm. I believe in a paradigm that reflects God's creativity and involvement in the world as specified by the revealed knowledge in Genesis. And that has been truncated. That has been pushed aside and erased and substituted by another paradigm that disguises what actually had happened, substituting a substitute explanation and trying to make it all naturalistic. So that's what I do sympathize with Thomas Kuhn, and I do agree with him in that textbooks, yes, the science textbooks, have thus begin by truncating God's Word, the scientists, the believers' sense of his discipline's history and our history, the whole world's history. It's truncated, and then proceed to supply a substitute which I believe is the evolutionary theory, which was first offered in the 600 BC by the early Greek philosophers as a substitute for they were having a change in paradigm. No more authority, no more religion, no more of what we've always followed. We're going with now reason. They have eliminated, substitute for what they have eliminated. Partly by selection and partly by distortion, the scientists of earlier ages are implicitly represented as having worked upon the same set of fixed problems and in accordance with the same set of fixed canons that the most recent revolution in scientific theory and method has made seem scientific. The textbooks then make it look like, by selection and partly by distortion, the scientists of earlier ages are implicitly represented as, well, the whole scientific enterprise was born by many theistic scientists that believed that God created, and that God created with representing order and representing his attributes, and therefore it was worth studying because it did arrive at a conclusion. It did arrive at illuminating the God who had created that. And now that has all been changed. That has been changed partly by selection and partly by distortion. The scientists of earlier ages are implicitly represented. So many of the founders of many of the subdisciplines in the science world today founded their discipline because they were Christians and because they did believe in a God that had created everything with order. As having worked upon the same set of fixed problems and in accordance with the same set of fixed canons that the most recent revolution in scientific theory and method has made seem scientific. Here's a quote here of a gentleman that said, Whitehead caught the unhistorical spirit of the scientific community when he wrote, "A science that hesitates to forget its founders is lost." Interesting quote, meaning that science has to be progressive, science has to keep going forward, science has to forget what's behind and reach forward to the future of what's ahead, forgetting what is behind. That almost sounds biblical. Paul says forgetting what is behind and reaching forward to the goal of becoming more like Christ. I don't think that was his intent, but yet, he's referring to Whitehead, yet he was not quite right. For the sciences, like other professional enterprises, do need their heroes and do preserve their names. Fortunately, instead of forgetting these heroes, scientists have been able to forget or revise their works. Ow, that's kind of a sharp stab. Just kind of like, okay, so Whitehead said, fortunately, we forget those that founded it, and we keep going forward and pretending like what they developed is part of what we believe today, what we practice today. But he says, we can't forget our heroes. We just have to rewrite what they wrote. By disguising such changes, the textbook tendency to make the development of science linear hides a process that lies at the heart of the most significant episodes of scientific development. Chapter 11, the title of it, The Invisibility of Revolutions. According to Thomas Kuhn, why are they invisible? How have they been made invisible? Well, by disguising such changes, the textbook tendency to make the development of science as linear. From the beginning of the enterprise, a textbook presentation implies scientists have striven for the particular objectives that are embodied in today's paradigm. Okay, we're striving then towards a goal. We're striving towards an objective, in that the earlier scientists were in line with the scientists of today striving towards the same objectives. And Kuhn is saying, from the beginning of the enterprise, a textbook presentation, which he says disguises or falsifies, distorts, implies scientists have striven for the particular objectives. Meaning that since the very beginning of science, that each scientist is adding his contribution towards the building accumulation of knowledge. One by one, in a process often compared to the addition of bricks to a building, scientists have added another fact, concept, law, or theory to the body of information supplied in the contemporary science text. But that is not the way science develops. The invisibility of revolutions. That wraps up chapter 11, the invisibility of scientific revolutions or of revolutions. This is chapter 13, Thomas Kuhn, Critical Thinking, wrapping on session number 11. We have 2 sessions more to go. Thank you again for joining us.